Well, Democrats continue to parrot the narrative that the investigation of the Biden crime family it's a nothing burger or fishing expedition, as Representative Dan Goldman called it. But the former FBI's Assistant Director, Chris Swecker, says differently after Hunter Biden's business associate gave a closed-door testimony to Congress yesterday. Here's more from Swecker. Listen.
As head of the criminal division, we saw this quite a bit in the bribery cases. It's called stream of services. You sell access or something of value, and you get something back in return, but it's not an express quid pro quo. It's just an understanding. But if you can match up the services within a reasonable period of time with the thing of benefit, in this case $10 million or whatever it is, then you have bribery. You don't have to have that express quid pro quo. And they were selling access. All you had to do, they do the big setup, and then they put Joe Biden on the phone and just shows that they have access. Here he is. He's on the phone. I just told you, we can do things for you. And there he is. So, I mean, that matches up perfectly. Then you match it up with the prosecutor gets fired. The prosecutor is going after Burisma right within that same time frame. Boy, you're really close to a slam dunk, in my opinion.
All right, so which is it? An obvious stain on the Biden family, a slam dunk, or just some fishing expedition by Republicans? Join me live now to discuss senior counsel for the Lawfare Project, Gerard Filitti, and former FBI agent turned whistleblower and author of True Blue, Steve Friend. Steve, I'm going to start with you. There's the former director of the FBI, a man maybe you're familiar with, saying this is an obvious case. This is a slam dunk case. What do you say?
I agree with him. I think the facts are pretty simple, and they've been laid out very well by the House Oversight Committee. And I'm really just mostly thrown off, and my alarms go off, but the fact that the levers of power have mobilized to the Biden family's benefit so often. We saw with the Gal Luft allegations that came out, and all of a sudden charges were levied against him. They tried so hard to prevent Devin Archer from testifying yesterday on this matter, and it's consistent with also charging those individuals who found the Biden daughter's diary. So I think that the Biden family is very much willing to use the power that's at its fingertips, very much like a crime syndicate.
Yeah. Gerard, when you heard all of this come out and the way that the Democrats were like, well, they were just talking about the weather and Hunter's nice new friends that he made in China and Russia and so forth. What was your take when you heard that was the spin being given to it by those on the left?
Well, my take is we haven't seen this in a while, but it reminded me of the mob prosecutions in New York City. This is RICO. It's being laid out as a RICO case. You see the bribery, you see the extortion, you see all the practices that fall within predicates for RICO. And I'm looking at this and saying this is no different than a mob family. This is how the prosecution, if they so wanted to, could go about this, because we've heard these arguments before from the heads of the 5 families in New York City, but they didn't work back then either. There were indictments and there were convictions. So this is all unavailing to say that this is, just talking about the weather or vacation. That's how the mob operates too. So we really are looking at a Biden crime family, and it's about time that it starts being prosecuted as such.
I want to ask you about Elena Barrett Bacharina as well. Elena Bacharina. She was the wife of the former mayor of Moscow. She apparently wired, $3.5 million to the Bidens. We now know there's a relationship there. Joe Biden, his administration, never went after her, even though she was the subject of an investigation herself. What do you make of that? Gerard?
Well, I'll jump in and say that what you want to look at is whether there's any evidence that these decisions were influenced by something practical, a legal consideration, or whether they were just decisions made by Biden for no apparent reason. Because the more you go towards the latter, the more there's a lack of justification for not enforcing the law and not going after someone, the more it looks likely that this was influence that was purchased. It's not so clear when you have other facts, but here we don't have them. So at the very least, Congress is asking the right questions. It needs to get more answers from Biden, from the Biden administration, from people who were in office at the tail end of the Obama administration. There need to be documents that lay out what happened, and to the extent that Biden can justify any of his decisions on something other than corrupt influence, he needs to do so.
Yeah, and Steve, I'm gonna end with this question because I just reviewed a case where the very same two prosecutors that tried to strike this plea deal, the sweetheart deal that got rejected last week in that Delaware disaster for the Bidens, same two prosecutors, another high-profile guy owed $67,000 in back taxes. Hunter Biden's debt was between $1.2 and $1.5 million at least. The guy that owed $67,000 spent 10 and a half months in prison. Hunter Biden got this plea deal. It's just another example of one sweetheart deal, one double standard after another. Steve, I'll give you the last word.
I think you've nailed it. We are definitely operating under a plutocracy. Certainly, that gentleman didn't show up to court in a motorcade and being underneath the Secret Service protection, but I think that image sort of says it all. He's a princeling. He's been under daddy's care for 53 years. He's not a young man. He's an adult, fully capable of making his own decisions. And even if everything he did and Joe was completely compartmentalized away from it, he's never been held accountable, and the president needs to highlight that fact, and it needs to hold his son accountable for what he did. But I don't think he's going to do that because it's very clear to me that Joe's been in on the scam the entire time.
Well, Joe and the Department of Justice and the FBI and a host of others, it just seems to it's one problem after another to the FISA courts, and the laundry list goes on. This is the biggest scandal in American history. I believe that Jonathan Turley is right about that. Gentlemen, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
All right. After the break, some politicians are pushing through the congressional recess to investigate the sweetheart plea deal for Hunter Biden and his legal team. More on that story coming up straight ahead on ABL. Stay right there.